we all knew that 45's budget proposal was impossible and full of shit. 45 released his latest proposed budget for the U.S. government on Monday. No sooner was the news announced than reminders that these annual proposals are political documents, not actual governing policy, began proliferating. And while that is of course true, 45's budgets are especially striking, not just for the gap between the proposals and what is realistically achievable, but for the gap between the proposals and what 45 seems to actually give a fuck about. The first thing to grasp about 45's budget proposal is how absolutely insane its priorities are. The problem here is pretty straightforward. The Republican Party has long been obsessed with eliminating America's federal deficit, the shortfall between how much annual tax revenue it brings in and how much it spends, but 45 and his party want to protect military spending, and 45 himself has repeatedly promised to hold Social Security and Medicare harmless. Those three commitments roll out reductions to almost two-thirds of the annual spending. Throw in the fact that the Republicans are hell-bent against raising taxes. 45's budget would make permanent the massive tax cuts they passed in 2017, and their only remaining option is to cut the remaining third of the budget, which means Medicaid, other welfare state programs like food stamps, and on welfare. That's basically what his supporters live on. 45 supporters live on welfare and food stamps, and he's going to cut that. And then they have no money to basically bring in. Basically everything the federal government does that isn't either military or social insurance for old people. And to meet 45's goal of balancing the federal budget in 15 years, these cuts have to be massive. If 45's budget were enacted, the Department of Agriculture, Education, and Energy would be cut by 8% apiece. The Small Business Administration and the Labor Department would get a cut to 11%. Transportation and Interior will be slashed by 13%. The Environmental Protection Agency, the State Department, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Commerce Department would get the biggest axe at 27%, 21%, 22%, and 37% respectively. These are comparable cuts to what 45's White House has proposed in previous years, but that doesn't make them any less insane. This would be catastrophic reductions. They would absolutely gut American society's ability to function. They would never get past Congress, and it's pretty clear that 45 himself and probably all but the most diehard members of the Republican Party don't really mean them. In his time in office, 45 has signed two major budget deals negotiated between the Democrats in the House and the Republicans in the Senate, and that increased spending on both the military and all those other domestic functions. To give a very concrete example, around this time last year, 45 promised at a Klan rally to protect full funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, even though the budget at his White House had just released called for a 90% reduction to that program. No less morally monstrous, but at least somewhat closer to the realm of reality at 45's proposals to limit spending on welfare programs like food stamps and Medicaid by imposing work requirements on them. If Republicans still held both houses of Congress, it's at least conceivable such a thing could pass, even though it's worth noting that more moderate Republicans ultimately balked at slashing the Medicaid spending when 45 and the Republicans tried to undo Obamacare in 2017. Ultimately, the pain such reductions would have caused to their constituents was too less for the ideologically extreme members of 45's party to stomach. In the meantime, the White House can and already is trying to implement those work requirements through executive actions that bypass Congress. This strategy, however, relies on the corporation of state governments, and many of them, even if controlled by Republicans, may be unwilling to ultimately bite that bullet. There are some other interesting bits in the new budget. In particular, it includes proposed efforts to bargain down drug prices, an unusual instance in which 45 would help out average Americans while forcing powerful pharmaceutical companies to eat most of the cost of the budget savings. But for the most part, the basic math of the budget emerges from the Republicans' determination to protect their constituencies and primary ideological commitments, i.e. older rulers, the wealthy, and the Pentagon, while foisting the cost of their extraordinary ambitious deficit reduction goals on everyone else. Admittedly, this is not exactly new terrain for the Republicans. The possibility of fitting these different goals together has dogged the party at least since Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan held sway during Obama's tenure. Even the fake president George W. Bush basically defaulted to cutting taxes, upping military spending, adding to Medicare, and just accepting the big deficit increases that resulted. But two things stand out about life under 45. The first is that the Republicans' ostensible ideological commitments and the utter impossibility of making them fit together are finally getting expressed in the actual annual White House budgets. The second is how obviously 45 simply does not give a shit. The squatter seems to grasp at some instinctive level that even his own right-wing base does not want to see major entitlement programs cut, and he obviously loves tax cuts and military spending. Beyond that, he doesn't really seem to have any hard opinions, as already noted. His actual behavior certainly gives no evidence that he's all committed to the goals laid forth in his own budget. 45 will occasionally make noise about how he will reduce the deficit or cut back on programs like Social Security, but it seems obvious that these products of the squatter's intrinsic flightiness, he grasps that certain people want to hear him say that in the moment, but it's passing and commitmentless thing. For the most part, the annual White House budgets under 45 seem to be the product of the hard right ideologues in the administration, particularly Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney. These are rumors that Mulvaney may be on the outs with 45 for unrelated reasons, but thus far he still remains in place at the White House, and for the time being, the squatter appears happy to let Mulvaney and his ideological co-travelers use the platform of his administration to indulge their budget fantasies while also more or less ignoring them in practice. One wonders what the point of the whole charade is, beyond throwing a few purely symbolic crumbles to certain parts of the Republican coalition.